Hello, everyone, and it's great you've joined us here to launch the Year of Green Activity. It is incredibly exciting that we finally launched this year, having agreed to do this 2 years ago at our National Delegate Conference. We know that while many people understand the importance of climate change and the environment, over this year we'll shape it as a trade union issue that needs to be addressed in our workplaces, our communities, and by working together with workers across the globe. We know that public services face specific challenges and huge opportunities with this agenda as well. So this session is just the start. Our national programme will look at the specifics for members in all the different sectors we work in, as well as specific impacts on key groups of members such as disabled members, women members, Black members and young members. Most importantly, we'll be developing activity on green issues within branches and directly with members and employers. It's an opportunity to make a real impact and make sure that not only are we tackling climate change, but workers have our say in the changes that this brings. We only have an hour and it's a packed agenda, but all going well, we'll aim to have time for a couple of questions at the end. There isn't a chat function that's been disabled for today, but there is a Q&A section. So if you pop your questions in the Q&A at the end of the session, we'll be able to pick those up. Joining myself, I'm glad we've got some great speakers. We've got Mika Minello Paluello from the TUC. Mika is the lead climate officer, and she will speak briefly on why the climate emergency is a key issue for the TUC. We have our very own Michelle Singleton, who is a policy officer here at UNISON, who's been leading our work on the climate and environment. And she will talk you through the work that UNISON is doing, what we're doing with the Year of Green Activity, and extend special message of support for our members. So we will, and then we'll have a excellent video that's already been trailed on our social media. It's great to have the wonderful Chris Packham supporting this work. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Mika from the TUC to give us that broad trade union perspective. Over to you, Mika.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Always great to be speaking directly with members and reps, and particularly UNISON, given all the important work UNISON is doing, and it's very much grab the climate agenda as a whole, and putting a lot of very proactive work out there. We're very excited about the year of what we're calling a trade union climate action, green activity, it all intersect. We're very excited about all the possibilities and how we can step up as a movement, particularly because we're facing a very, very tough reality today. Like, obviously, for those of us who've been organizing on climate for over 20 years, we've been facing a climate emergency for a very, very long time, clearly. And the climate impacts and the reality of how our planet is changing are just the threats, and the impacts on people's lives are becoming more and more stark. But I wanted to just flag right at the beginning that the tough reality that we face today is obviously also that the far right and reform are changing the conversation, and that they're changing conversation nationally, but they're also shifting where union members are, and that the situation, and we see this increasingly, that in our conversations with reps, that where people used to go, yes, obviously climate change is happening, that's being eroded. And when it used to be, yes, we need to take climate action, and that's being eroded. And that's obviously at the same time as climate action hasn't actually delivered improvements to people's lives sufficiently that we need to see, not because of climate action per se, but because of the way we've had neoliberal climate policy, often most of the time, and alongside privatization. That means that the impacts that people see is that the cost has often been dropped onto workers and onto normal people rather than onto corporations. So some people walked away with lots of profits, billionaires have walked away with lots of profits, and that creates a very challenging situation here and now in that how do we shift that? How do we change that? Because obviously the urgency of climate action is still there, whether it's in terms of the impacts in the global south with millions and millions of people facing increasingly devastating impacts, whether it's about ensuring that we have fully insulated homes in the UK, which are obviously necessary because of fuel poverty and because it's winter, because of the reality today. But once the future at some point, whether it's in 5 years or 20 years or 80 years, hits of the high risk of the Gulf Stream shifting, at that point, retrofitted warm homes reaches a whole different level of importance. And then there's also the key component on, well, how do we actually make sure that climate action doesn't leave workers behind, whether that's North Sea oil and gas workers, particularly in the onshore supply chain, which whether that's in steel, whether that's in manufacturing. And the risk is that we have climate policy that doesn't take those workforces with, and then plays into the far right's hands, which is why it's absolutely essential that we're winning that climate policy that delivers good quality jobs, but also not just new jobs, but future-proofs those existing jobs, that make sure that the steel workers can build good, clean, long steel made in the UK. Those plants are future-proofed. The oil and gas supply chain is future-proofed and adapted so that because obviously there's a limit to how much oil and gas we're going to be taking out of the ground in the North Sea, but that those supply chain firms can adapt to be supporting wind or other sectors. And that as much as possible, workers can stay in their own sites. So a lot of TUC's work that we're doing is about, well, how do we work with and support workers whose jobs are at risk to make sure that they are taking lead and they are putting together workers' plans and campaigning and organising for workers' plans to upgrade, to future-proof, to decarbonise, to secure their jobs for the long run, by delivering the climate action that we need to see, so that we're not having that like pitting against each other, but actually we're fighting for those good solutions that work for all of us. Within the year of activity, we've put together a website. So if you look, we've completely revamped. If people want to look at the TUC's climate page, you can just Google TUC and climate. Then you get our year of climate activity, where there's lots of resources that we've put together. We're also pulling together the resources from affiliates and events. So there's an events page. If you've got any local events you want us to include in there, put them there. We're also exploring how we can up the game with green reps. Beyond, obviously, we've got a lot of activity with like in industrial sectors and with future green reps, but how do we work with green reps across the board and up the game on that? We've got existing networks, but could it work? We're exploring whether it might be useful to pull together green reps across different sectors, across different unions later in the year. There is an education event, I think, in a few months' time, pulling together green reps in education sectors, but how is it useful to do it elsewhere across the board? We're very open to that. But we don't want to do it just for the sake of it. So people on the call, very much, if you're like, yes, we would find it useful to be linked together and to come together and to have, whether it's an online event or in-person events with green reps in other sectors or locally. And if you think that's useful for us to do that, then please do tell us that, feed that back to us, and then we can try to do it, because obviously that's our role, is to support the movement as a whole. And then I need to wrap up so I don't go too long. The final bit is making sure that this climate work really does hit, that it speaks to people where they are at, because there is a big risk, which is a lot of what we've seen over the past decades, is that those working on climate and on green issues to themselves, and that we tend to speak increasingly inward, and we don't pull everything. We're not speaking to where people are at, particularly at this point where living. where living standards are very much, and like cost of living is very much at people's forefront of mind. So making sure that our climate action solutions and our organising speaks to people where they are at, and also making sure that our climate interventions undermine the far right. Do we find, well, where can we really whack them and push back and do interventions to make it harder for them, that we're not playing onto their ground? One of the immediate bits we're thinking is to try and expand. We've got an Industrial Voices program. We've been doing a lot of work of training people up to produce social media videos, because the far right are winning, including pushing back against climate in the digital space. And we're doing that a lot with industrial workers, but we also want to do reps across the board and with members, particularly in talking about climate impacts as workers. And in the past, we've done stuff on training people up to do like broadcast interviews when it's really hot during a heat wave, making sure that that when there's a heat wave, we've got workers going on TV saying, here's the impact. But actually, right now, it's more about digital ultimately. So we want to train up lots of members across the movement to be able to make, when there's a storm, that you've got a CW member going, a tree fell on our poster. Like that just, and like, or when the electricity workers going, the pylons have come down and we're the ones going out, making sure that we keep your lights on. And that's dangerous to us as well. So we're both talking about the health and safety issues here and now, and obviously the changes we need from government to protect workers, but also how that also about climate as part of that. And that these things, that the impacts are real, workers on the front line are feeling them, and that if we can have the voices and the pushing it out in the digital space of workers going, I'm doing my job and it's impossibly hot, and this is what it looks like, that we're filling that space, because that's part of where we can then push back against far right and tell those narratives about what it really means and who the voices are that should have, that are trusted to speak to those issues, which are ultimately workers, but filling the gaps. We're going to be running a series of trainings. We've started doing some, we'll run more trainings on producing videos and supporting each other to build a network on that. So that'll be another one of our key outputs that we want people to work with us on. Ultimately, I think if we come out of the year of climate action with more members who are activated, to be building, ultimately, like it's still about building power within the unions and building our membership and building the activator base to push for those political solutions that we need on the national level and on the local level to get that rapid and just climate transition. Thank you.
Thanks, Mika. That was great. I'm sure it's stimulating a lot of questions in people's minds, but just to remind people, there is that Q&A bit on the team, so please put your questions in and we'll come to them at the end. So just a reminder to be thinking of your questions, and as soon as you've thought of them, pop them in that box. We'll now go over to Michelle, who, like I say, has been working on this issue for a number of years, often behind the scenes, because UNISON covers and deals with so many different issues, and we've got so much to say on so many things. It can be difficult to see some of the things that we do, but I've worked with Michelle for many years and know that UNISON has done a huge amount on environmental and climate issues for as long as I've been active in the union, which is more years than I care to mention. And one of the things this year we'll do, we'll highlight some of the things we're already doing, as well as build the activity and work on this issue across the union. So Michelle will talk about some of the excellent work that we're doing and what we've got planned. So over to you, Michelle.
Thanks, James. So yes, I'm going to do a PowerPoint, I'm afraid, but as much as anything, that's to keep me on track, because if any of you have heard me speak before, I do need to be contained, otherwise I could talk about this forever. So I am going to make sure that you can hear the video I've got embedded and share my screen. And hopefully people can see the presentation now. I'm getting nods. That is fantastic. Okay, so yes, we do have, as James mentioned, before we go to the Q&A, and I do hope we have sufficient time for a good amount of questions, we do have a lovely message of support from Chris Packham, which is why I need to be a little bit more constrained about the time that I use today. So what we hope to cover is going to be a background to the climate emergency, where we're at now, which Mika actually has done a fantastic job of expanding on. The background to UNISON, the history of UNISON in this space, why climate change is an issue, particularly for public services and our members, what UNISON is doing right now, and of course, UNISON's year of green activity. And I'm just going to shift the little view of myself over to another corner where it's not quite so in the way. We'll see how that goes. Okay, so
Well, Michelle, you seem to have put yourself on mute.
thank you. That was part of me trying to move myself out of the way. So yes, just to start off with a few of the stark facts, which many of you perhaps are already aware of, but some of you won't be, about the climate. So climate change is not a distant threat. I think we know that now. Right now, pollution alone causes more excess deaths than war, drugs, malaria, HIV and alcohol combined, and that's in the UK as well as globally. Extreme weather events. Yeah.
Sorry, we can't see your presentation. Oh, it's okay. My colleague says she can. It must be me. Beg your pardon.
Okay, good. We'll get there. So yes, extreme weather events are more frequent, causing thousands of excess deaths globally and here in the UK. And last year we had new disease-carrying mosquitoes for the first time in the UK due to the warmer climate. And while that particular stark fact is quite scary, currently the disease they're carrying affects magpies, but it is a sign of the different things that we'll be having to face just in the UK because of climate change, that we are now seeing disease-carrying mosquitoes, which is something that we all need to be concerned about. And the Environment Agency very recently announced that by 2050, 1 in 4 homes will be at risk of flooding, and all of our environment agencies across the UK will be having almost identical conversations about identical forecasts. So climate change in UNISON. Well, UNISON has been active on the issue of climate change since formation, as James mentioned. Actually sent a message of support to what's now regarded as the first global climate conference in 1995, because we recognise that climate change impacts many core trade union and UNISON specific issues like public finances and resources, job security and workplace safety. And we recognise that climate change would impact on all the services our members deliver. So we're a founder member of TUSDAC, which Mika didn't mention, but which is the TUC sort of forum of trade unions that was established in 1998. It's the Trade Union Sustainable Development Action Committee. And UNISON was the first union to sign up to the International Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is not easy to say, so I'm glad that went okay. And now members are increasingly seeing the impacts of climate change on their jobs, families and their communities, and are rightly demanding that UNISON is active on climate change, with our latest survey just before Christmas showing that 90% of respondents are concerned about the impacts, with 50% being very concerned. So climate change impacts on public services very particularly. It directly impacts on public finances, on public health, of course, which has a huge strain on it already. The cost of living crisis, because the costs of food and energy alone are massively impacted when extreme weather disrupts supply chains. The education and skills agenda is necessarily changing to meet the new skills required to meet these new issues, and all other areas of public policy are being affected. And the financial and human cost of doing nothing far outweighs the cost of action. So when talking about the costs of meeting our net zero targets, climate deniers will often overlook the fact that the cost of doing nothing vastly outweighs the cost of acting now, because our own research in 2022 showed that unless most of the adaptations and changes are done by 2030, very early on, 2030 is not far away, then not only are you not reaping the rewards of getting some of those savings, because a lot of the first things that people will do will actually create savings, and it's those savings that you use to then do the remainder of the work. So you need to get those savings in as soon as possible. But of course, also, the longer we leave it, the more damage will be done that will require more funding to actually pick up the pieces off. And of course, it's our members that are picking up the pieces. They're the essential social infrastructure at the front line of preventing, preparing and protecting against the impacts of climate change. And many of our members' day-to-day jobs are all about dealing with the immediate consequences. We've got the environment agencies and water companies whose job it is to meet all the disasters and plan against the increased demands, and all with less resources than they had in the past, not more. And we also have members working in the energy sector who are rightly concerned about how they might be affected by the transition away from fossil fuels. And of course, working conditions across all sectors are increasingly uncomfortable and unsafe. And that came out very clearly in the survey that we did. We had hundreds of responses detailing how members are already feeling the impacts of climate change negatively. And this is just, I don't know if you can see it on whatever device you're looking at, but this is just a small selection of the examples people gave. And I'm just going to pick the one in the middle there, that as a healthcare assistant, we're on the front line of human impact, and climate change is a care issue now. It affects who I care for, how I care, and the work environment. And our members will be feeling that, you'll be feeling that, every single one of you will probably have an example of how extreme weather, flooding, pollution is affecting the job you do in one way or another. So the scale of transformation required in public services, well, in 2015, the Climate Act mandated that all public sector employers needed to produce plans to get to net zero by 2050. Large-scale, multi-year transition plans are already being drawn up and already being implemented. Every service will be affected, and most of our private and voluntary sector organisations will be expected to follow suit. Tendering for work will include an expectation of being able to meet climate change commitments as well. Physical workspaces are changing, new ways of working are being introduced, and the way our services are delivered will be and is already changing. And yet worker voice on what changes are happening and how those changes to services are going to be arrived at, largely neglected to date, not in all circumstances, but a lot of the time, trade unions are not being invited to have those discussions and to have that vital worker experience included in the planning for necessary change. So public services and just transition. Just transition is one of those phrases that within climate change circles is used all the time. Everyone understands what it means, but we recognise that it's sometimes quite meaningless to other people. And essentially, while UNISON is clear that change is vital, we can't put off the necessary changes until a more convenient time. Just transition is about ensuring that the necessary changes, the necessary movement towards a greener economy, greener workplaces must be fair. I mean, it's simply that it must be fair and it mustn't leave anyone behind. So changing jobs should be protected. Training should be provided, and proper investment is going to be needed for the increasing demands of this change and of mitigating the climate impacts that are happening, even if change doesn't happen. So workers in the communities they serve should be part of the conversation. That's a clear part of just transition, that things shouldn't be imposed on our communities or on our workforces. It absolutely should be part of those conversations. And that no group should be disproportionately disadvantaged. And we know that they are. We know that climate change impacts do disproportionately disadvantage all the same usual groups of disadvantage that are already in existence, are just exacerbated by climate change. And also to remember that there are opportunities and benefits. There are new technologies, there are financial savings, there are new jobs, and that where there are opportunities and benefits, they should be shared equally and not just hoarded in some areas, some industries. So moving on to what UNISON is doing to support this agenda. In 2020, UNISON put all of its climate change work into one area under the heading of the Green UNISON campaign, and you'll see dedicated pages on our website to Green UNISON. We have branch environmental officers were introduced as a formal role in 2022, and we held our inaugural environmental officers seminar in 2025, so just last year. We have regional networks for green reps to share ideas and get support. We have a national newsletter, which is open to all members as a main vehicle, really, of finding out what we're doing and how you can get engaged. We have a new comprehensive toolkit and bargaining guide, which is actually quite massive. And actually, the TUC have a fantastic guide as well. But this is a guide specifically for public services and our members working within them. And it can seem perhaps off-puttingly large, but that's because it's a pick and mix. You can pick out small, discrete areas of activity, things to do, or it takes you right through to potentially setting up a joint forum with your employer, with the trade unions, to discuss the massive transformations that need to happen and make sure that worker voice is included. We have training and guidance for activists. We've got so far general, local government and health specific training, with others coming online. We have bite-sized modules for members, recognising this is kind of a new area for a lot of people to be discussing, and people aren't necessarily confident about what it's all about. And so to bring people along and build confidence for people to consider taking up the green roles, we're developing some bite-sized modules. And we have instituted for the last, I think, 5 or 6 years, annual Green Unison Week, which happens in mid-September, where not only do we lay on some activities and webinars centrally, but we encourage all individuals and branches to get involved and mark the week in some way as well. And of course, we're continuing our policy work, the lobbying of governments to do what they must do to meet the challenges ahead. And then there's this 2026 Year of Green Activity, which complements the wider TUC Year of Trade Union Activity, but is more member focused, which is why it's sort of activity rather than activism, because we wanted it to be about bringing our members in to all the work we're doing in this area. So what are the objectives of the Year of Green Activity? It's largely to do what I've just touched on in the last few slides, which is to highlight why climate change is a core trade union issue for public services and our members particularly, to showcase what we're already doing, because as James alluded to, we are doing actually quite a lot of work, but it is largely unseen because people don't necessarily expect us to be doing the work, and it's hard with a large union like ourselves. We're doing so many things, it's hard to just stumble across sometimes the work that we're doing in certain areas. To provide engagement and activity points every month of this year, to promote the environmental officer role and the support available to members and branches, to promote the bargaining guide, to encourage branches to add Green Unison to their agendas, because this is a workplace issue and it isn't going away, and to encourage newsletter sign-ups. As I've mentioned, it is the only way of updating you on our work at the moment, and it is a useful tool. There's usually activities and information which goes out about 8 times a year. So this is our schedule of activity for the 2026 Year of Activity. I am not expecting any of you to be able to read any of that, but this is by way of just showing you how many things we're planning, but also this is what it'll look like when you go to our website and have a look for it. And I think the link might be attached to the chat here or in the Q&A at some point soon as well. But otherwise, just go onto our website and have a look and you'll find it quite easily. So just to go through that schedule without you having to read it, some of the key events that are planned is, of course, this launch webinar. And as of today, you'll see that there's a launch pack if you go online that has quite a few different materials that you can take a look at and explore, including what we're calling inspiration lists, which is a sort of list of lots of different things that you might consider doing as an individual or as a branch, or as an individual encouraging your branch to do over the next year. And there's a variety of different sort of categories of things that you might want to consider. And not everyone can do everything, and nobody would be expected to try and tick through everything on the list, but there might just be something there that speaks to you as something that you can do that you wouldn't otherwise necessarily have thought of to do throughout the year. We've got special lunchtime training module that can be run in all branches, and that is online at the moment. So that is an hour-long presentation workshop that any branch can book a room, invite all members. It's pre-recorded presentation with space at the end to consider what you've just heard and consider next steps as a branch. And we'd encourage all branches to run that at some point in the year. And as a member, you can encourage your branch to do so. We've got political engagement opportunities planned on winnable issues throughout the year. So there's 4 of those at the moment, and they would include a political push for maximum workplace temperatures, increase investment in public transport, facility time for green reps, and other issues as well. And we've got dedicated highlight months to showcase the impacts on a variety of sectors and equality groups, which is mostly going to be in the form of webinars. And the first 3 months of those you can already register to, and we're hoping to have a rolling 3 months of them available to register for. So take a look to see what those are. We've got a special mini film festival in September when we'd normally have our Green Week, because we're lucky enough to have this year-long highlight, where, as well as having other activities, we're going to be hosting 3 films that we've selected and got permission to host. And one of them you'll be able to watch in your branch, and your branch can lay on a screening, but we'll also have communal screenings and an opportunity to catch up and chat about it, in one case with the director after the communal screenings as well. So look out for those. You'll be able to see which films we've selected and have a look at some trailers if you go on our website. And we'll have social media engagement to mark key dates in the year like Refugee Week and Earth Day. So look out for those as well. And then throughout the year, we'll have editorial content highlighting different aspects, possibly amplifying some of the ones we've already highlighted or highlighting other areas that we haven't been able to cover. And also look out for separate regional, sector and equality group plans, because as well as our central schedule of activity, our regions and our equality groups and different sectors will pick a few items for themselves that really resonate, that are pertinent for them, and they'll be at some point during this year laying on those activities as well. And lastly, I've forgotten about this one, of course, being the policy officer who's responsible for it, there'll be research being done throughout the year, new briefings, reports on key topics. For instance, climate disinformation and the far right is one of the ones which Mika spoke about so eloquently earlier. So this is the last slide, I promise you. But essentially, we're encouraging you to get engaged in any way you can, and to remember that this is a highlight year. But December 2026 is not an endpoint. This work was there before this year, and it will absolutely need to essentially continue beyond it. And importantly, we know that avoiding climate catastrophe is not your responsibility. Your recycling is not expected to save the world. What you do is not the be all and end all, no matter what anyone makes you think. But it will take everyone getting on board to make sure that governments and communities get this right for all of us at home, at work, nationally and globally. And to remember that we are part of the solution and that there is still hope. The technologies are in place. There is every reason to come together and assume that we can still effect change with all of the activities that we'll be making you aware of throughout the year. So now, hopefully I've not spoken for so long that we haven't got time for a few questions, as well as this special message for our members from a year of green activity supporter, but I think the cat's out of the bag that it's Chris Packham.
We've got quite a few questions coming through. One of them, the common one, is whether people will get copies of the slides. I know we're planning to. We're going to share the recording of this, and I think there are are there slides going to be shared, or are they already some slides in a pack?
Yes, the whole recording is going to be shared. Whether or not we share the slide, we can share the slides as well as a pack. I think that probably will be useful. But yes, certainly the recording of this entire webinar will be made available within a couple of days. And people can sort of pause on the bits that I stumbled over and have a look at the wording better and things like that. But yes, we will be making all of that available. But it's okay with you if I go straight onto the message of support now?
Fab, yeah. I just know lots of people will be thinking, oh, did I need to scribble notes down? So yes.
Oh, Chris Packham here. I'm a broadcaster and environmental activist. I'm also a great fan of Billy Bragg. And one of my favourite songs that he wrote is There's Power in a Union. And I've always been, whenever possible, very supportive of unions. I lived through Thatcher in the 1980s. And given that I grew up in a 3 up, 3 down, came from a working class family, you can only imagine which side of the fence I was sat on. So I consider it a real privilege to be asked to be able to speak to you today for a multitude of reasons. And I hope you're all well, and I hope you've had a good Christmas and you're moving into a happy and healthy new year. But for all of us, that's going to be increasingly difficult. And you know why? Because of climate breakdown and biodiversity loss. Now, I think one of the problems we face when it comes to connecting with people over these issues is that there's still a perception that it's happening somewhere else. It's not actually happening here. But that's probably not the case for many of you, because I imagine that you are beginning to be standing and working at the forefront of the negative impacts of climate breakdown when it comes to extreme weather events and how they impact on all of our lives. So that could be flooding, it could be drought, it could be human health, it could be inequality caused by rising food prices. All of these things are going to get even more difficult unless we address them ever more urgently. Another problem that we face when it comes to this existential issue of climate breakdown and biodiversity loss is that we think that we can't have and impact ourselves because they're big global issues that are quite beyond our reach. But hey, there's power in a union. You may think that you're just a drop in the ocean, but an ocean is a multitude of drops. So when those drops unite, they become a force for change. And I think that that's something that we need to recognise. Now, one of the things that we need to immediately address is that very often we are put upon, these issues have become our fault. So, as an example, we are told that we have to recycle to solve the plastic crisis, the pollution crisis when it comes to plastic. It's down to us. We've got to put those in the bin. And if we don't put them in the bin, essentially we're bad people. And if we do put them in the right bins, we're good people, and we can feel good that we played a role in addressing that issue. And to some very infinitesimally small amount, there's a truth in that. But ultimately, of course, it's not our problem, is it? It's the problem of those people that are still producing vast quantities of plastic. It's your Coca-Colas, isn't it? They're really the people causing the problem and then putting it upon us. It's like being told to car share, isn't it? So that we cut down on our, emissions, CO2 emissions. 4 people in a car is clearly better than 1 in a car. I can't argue with that. But ultimately, if we weren't still burning those fossil fuels, if we weren't still granting licenses for their exploration and exploitation, then actually we could address the issue far more forthrightly than by sharing a car. It's their fault. It's the fossil fuel industry's fault. And they've known that since the 1960s. And they are still drill, baby, drilling. And governments around the world who are only interested in short-term politics are still investing in those industries because they think that it will help them get re-elected in the short term. I don't know about you, when it comes to my job and my future, I look further than next Thursday. I'm interested in a sustainable future for the planet in terms of people and wildlife, where we can live in a happy, healthy place with proper access to resources that ought to be available to everyone. Affordable food, affordable housing, a decent education, and critically, access to healthcare, proper healthcare. Global inequality, financial inequality, is basically underpinning all of our efforts, undermining all of those efforts to address all of these issues. So I know where you stand on that, and I stand firmly with you. But ultimately, we have to act more urgently. Because when I tell you, as a science communicator, that we are on the brink, please believe me, we are on the brink. We are being buried in a tsunami of misinformation about the climate. Climate denial is now back on the agenda, and it's being perpetuated and promoted by really unscrupulous and extraordinarily dangerous politicians here in the UK. They would kill us all, and they may well if we let them get their way. We've got to listen to the truth. We've got to make best informed decisions based upon fact. And the people with the facts are the scientists. This is a time when we should listen to science. And we know that our politicians should listen to scientists because before Christmas, the COVID report was produced. And it said that if that government had listened to the scientists, it could have saved 23,000 lives in the first lockdown. It would not have lifted that lockdown as early as it did. And ultimately, that the Eat Out to Help Out scheme was put together with no scientific advice whatsoever. And it led to the loss of even more lives. When it comes to climate breakdown, the loss of lives will be off the scale. The tragedy, the terrible tragedy of COVID and its impact will be significantly smaller. So this is all bad news. I'm aware of that. I've presented you here with a problem or a series of problems. But what you know and I know is that really that also represents an extraordinary number of opportunities. It's opportunities for us to be able to live in a more sustainable, harmonious, healthy and happy world. It's opportunities to invest in people and businesses and jobs, which will be an essential part of that. A just transition away from our dependence on fossil fuels, where we retrain and re-employ those people in those industries, and we subsidise that, so it's not difficult for them. And who subsidises it? Well, maybe those petrochemical companies who are currently being subsidised through tax relief by our government, so let's get rid of that, and also making billions and billions in record profits, whilst people in the UK are making decisions about whether they heat their front room or cook their dinner. Inequality again. Polluter pays in my world. Let's make those people subsidise the transition for all of those in their industries to, in that case, renewables. And then people will say, oh, well, hold on, we're just the UK, we're just a tiny little country. But we're a country that has led so many times throughout history, and we should be leading now. China, 50% of its energy comes from renewables. 50% of its cars are electric at this point in time. You know, they are investing more in research and development of renewable energies than every other country put together on Earth. Why? Because in X years' time, when we finally wake up to the fact that we're in deep, deep trouble, we will be buying Chinese solar panels, Chinese wind turbines, and everything else. Now, I'm not in any way nationalistic, and I've got nothing against the Chinese people whatsoever. But I would like to see people who are struggling in the UK, you know, be afforded opportunities through bold and brave leadership so that they and their families have secure economic futures, and we can all live in a better world. And all of this is possible. So my earlier prophecies were not of doom and gloom. They were realistic, but at the same time, they've got to be balanced with the fact that if we were to act more broadly and more rapidly and more urgently, we could make a difference, a positive difference to all of our lives. And from my point of view, of course, the lives of everything else that lives out here in the wild world, which we are dependent upon. We are dependent on ecosystem services Earth. Every day when we put food in our mouth, it's come out of a soil which needs to be healthy, or we've dragged it out of the sea which needs to be healthy. Without functional ecosystems on this planet, we as a species again are in deep, deep trouble. So that means transitioning the way that we eat, what we eat, how we produce it, how we distribute it, how much it costs, where it's available. All things which are tried and tested and can be done. And all things actually which are recommended by our government, its Climate Change Committee, and internationally the IPCC. One of those things is you've got to eat less meat. There's no ambiguity about it. It's not Chris banging on about animal welfare because he cares about the appalling conditions that farmed animals are kept in. It comes down to our own health. That's part of it. And also, again, environmental health. We don't have a choice. So why not be smart and invest in prevention and not wait to have to find a cure? Anyway, ultimately, what can we do? Well, let me go back to that point where it's about us. It's not our fault, but we can still make a difference. And why should we do that? Well, because personal empowerment, standing up, whether you're on a picket line or whether you're voting for someone or whether you're simply signing a petition, whatever you do, standing up for your rights makes you feel good. It's empowering. It means that you've exercised your voice, another fundamental democratic right. Your right to protest, exercise that voice. And every single one of your voices is important. Never forget that your voice is important. Never be put down or passed over. Your voice is important. Use it. Use that voice. So make sure that you vote for the right people on every level. The people who are going to be caring for your future. The people who you can truly trust to do that. Think very carefully when you put that cross in the box. Sign those petitions. Man those picket lines. Address those issues. That empowerment is incredibly important. And if you want to make a difference, I can tell you that, yeah, eat less meat. You will be, if you eat the right things, healthier. The world will be gradually healthier. I'm not telling you to go vegan overnight. I'm just saying eat less meat. And if you do eat less meat, choose meat which has come from a better standard of welfare for the animal, for the environment, and for yourself. And then think about where your money is. Because if you want to reduce your carbon footprint, you know, car sharing, yeah, great, and all those other things, brilliant, oh, wow. But the one thing that you can really do to have the biggest impact is to make sure that you invest your money. That's where you bank, that's where you have a pension, that's where you take out insurance, in companies that do not invest in fossil fuels or weapons or anything else. And by making that one change, which you can do on your mobile phone in about 3 or 4 minutes, you will reduce your carbon footprint more than any amount of car sharing or other nonsense. Just change where you bank, move to an ethical bank. And lots of banks, I've got to tell you, have already got the message and they're moving in that direction. But we can still nudge them further by taking that action. And again, if we do that, we feel good. We tell our mates, we tell our community, we tell our colleagues, you know, and the movement grows. You've got a movement, you've got millions of members. And we're moving into a period of time where, for all sorts of reasons, not just the things that I've been discussing here, but, you know, employment rights, access to special educational needs, which is, I'm currently really worried about, education generally, health generally, we're going to have to just stand up and be counted. We built something that once worked and was, in its way, wonderful, probably always could have been better. But I'm only standing here talking to you because I've enjoyed, you know, the benefits of a national health system. I'm only standing here talking to you because I went through a comprehensive school where teachers cared and taught me properly in the 1960s and 70s. It doesn't have to go south. It can go somewhere great, but we've got to do it. And I can't think of a better bunch of people to be on board. People with integrity, people who know what life is really about. People know what work is really about. So come on, let's pull together, because collectively we have to make a difference and we have to do it now. So in whatever way you can, in your workplace or in your personal life, this is the time to stand up and be counted. I know you will. Thank you.
Well, I think that was truly excellent, and I got to watch that video a few weeks ago when it first came through, and we'd asked for a brief message of support, and particularly impressed that we got quite a long and clearly committed message. And I think seeing that other people recognise the value that trade unions as a movement have in the wider environment campaign, I think is really important. We do, I'm glad to say, have some time for questions. So I'm going to try and summarise some of them so that we could get as many in as we can. So I'll ask a couple of questions at a time to the both of you, if that's okay. We've had a question from Miranda, and a few other people raised the issue as well about AI and AI being used more and more in workplaces, and how we deal with that and the climate impact. And Bridget and quite a few others asked how we access training for reps and others on these environmental issues. So Michelle, do you want to go first, and then I'll bring Mika in?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, AI has been coming up on our agenda for a couple of years now, but really people are beginning to recognise it as a climate change issue more recently. So I know the TUC does a huge amount of work on AI generally, punching, you know, above even its weight in what it's achieved in terms of advice about the general implications. But certainly we're very aware and lucky enough to have one of our policy officers lead on this issue. One of our, or you can already register for one of our webinar highlights that is just about this issue, and that's just because our members made it very clear they wanted to be talking about it. So register for our webinar and find out more, because it is absolutely a key issue for climate change. The amount of energy and water is going to cause huge problems across the globe, and particularly here in the UK, where there are plans for large servers. And while there might be some clever ways of using the heat generation from these servers to I don't know, heat swimming pools, and those kind of clever innovations are going to be needed, it is a problem, absolutely, and I'm sure Mika will talk more about it. Oh, I'll quickly mention access to training, if I may, and
Yes,
that is,
please.
yeah, I can't remember exactly which bit of our website is dedicated to our activist training resources, but there is one, and we'll make sure those links are available when we put this whole recording online as well. We'll make sure it has a whole host of links that have been asked for.
Fab. And over to you then, Mika.
Thanks. Yes, we'll also share any our upcoming trainings, so those can be accessed. AI is a very, like, it intersects with everything across the board, and I mean there's a clear pathway that AI's growth leads to more money for billionaires, with more money pumped into both into energy consumption, but also pumped back towards the far right, so that you don't have to a lot of the impacts for power for worker voice and the impacts on climate are very, very tightly interlinked there. And we also see it increasingly, like AI's demands for, it's both the demands made by AI for electricity in terms of what that means for where new power is constructed, but also for land and also for water. Immediately starts into, like, there's struggles happening from Brick Lane in East London to Teesside. There's questions about, do you get data centers built, or do you get industrial sites that actually employ people with decent job quality and or housing, and there's a risk of more and more data centers being built instead of manufacturing that employs people, or instead of housing that houses people. And then on top of that, you've got the greater electricity consumption, and then the questions about, well, is that clean? Is it not clean? And then is it using up to clean it? And then also, is it driving up bills further? Because, you know, we build loads of renewables, well, it should bring down bills. But if we build loads of renewables and then we have way more consumption because of loads more data centers, then that's driving up bills for people at home. So that intersects. And I think one of the questions in there was also about, like, what are the local fights that people can have and that people can organize around. And I would say that it makes sense to go, well, where there are struggles around data centers, for example, then that can be a good space for alliances between different unions and between different community groups, is there like a Unite want to make sure there's a different manufacturing site, and maybe like others like, well, we need to think about the climate impacts and others, and that's a good place of coming together on it.
Thanks. So the next questions, Robin, who is new to being a rep, asked about linking up and making networks with other people and finding out information. I think there was another question about regional networks in there as well. I mean, I can answer that my own region doesn't currently have a structure, but should soon, because my branch took a motion to our last regional council to set that up. But yeah, so how we link up with other people and make sure we've got the resources that we need. And then a big question that I know we've had lots of talk about the far right, but it was a specific question about what will happen if there are staff whose jobs are working on climate change, that if control of particular local authorities changes, the posts might go, and what will be the impact of that on our agenda. So I shall go the opposite direction and go to Mika first on this one.
Thanks, Graham. The other thing I didn't mention of AI is that off the back, the TUSDEC committee that Michelle mentioned earlier that we run has been identifying plans of activity for unions to work on collectively during the next year of climate climate activity. And there's 8 different strands, one of which is specifically AI as an energy issue that UNISON want to be involved in, as well as CW and PCS and NEO and TSC. So there might well be a bunch of more like cross-union activity on that. On networks, obviously Michelle speaks for like the regional within UNISON. I think there are existing, depending on regions, there are green union networks across unions and between unions. So, for example, I think Yorkshire and Humber has got more activity on that. So that is useful to be plugged into, because obviously it's where we interlink. And also we are in the process of launching a new campaign, which we've kickstarted in Wales first, called Their Save Welsh Industry, and in the UK Save British Industry, which is framed very much around like industrial jobs, so will sound less relevant at first to most UNISON members, but this is very much a climate campaign that's about cutting out the far right and going that ultimately it's reform that are threatening, it's Farage's policies that are threatening steel jobs. It's Farage's policies that are threatening glass jobs, because Farage has made clear he wants to cut £200 billion of investment into climate. Now, there isn't actually even that much. That's more than there is even investment, but still, he's made clear that reform will cut all of it. Now, if you cut all of it, that means that you knock out the upgrades that we need to currently high carbon manufacturing jobs to keep those, to decarbonize those and to keep them competitive, which means we lose the manufacturing base that we've got left in this country, and we end up importing dirty steel from India, or maybe clean steel from Sweden at some point in time. But what we lose is we lose any of that here, which obviously will drive people, like we know that losing the industrial heartlands drives people further to the far right, but it's Farage's policies that do that the most. And that's like this space to organize around, where there's a massive space for us as unions collectively or to organize around going, this is, yes, it's a fight for climate, but it's also a fight for these ceramics jobs and these glass jobs and these chemicals jobs and these steel jobs. And it's a way of going, we need to save these jobs here and now. And the big threat to them is the far right. And the way we save them is by investing into climate action. So it's great to have like, we need to have the Unite and GMB members very much active who are in those manufacturing sites, and that's where a lot of our work goes. But the power of the union movement comes when we have those local networks where you've got the UNISON members, you've got the FBU members, you've got CW members, and you've got the climate activists from Friends of the Earth all showing up going, we're going to organise together in Runcorn or in Teesside or in Port Talbot to deliver the ambitious climate transition here, save those jobs, and stop Farage. So that those networks are very much key, I think.
Over to you, Michelle. Yeah,
I mean, that's a really powerful encapsulation of the sort of wider stuff that we need to be getting involved in. So to bring it back to sort of UNISON and our networks, yeah, very interested. We do have quite a lot of new activists because of this agenda. Once they realise that we're doing a lot and that we're able to encourage people to get involved, there's a lot of very active and established activists who are taking on this work enthusiastically. But we're also need to be very mindful that we're often attracting people who perhaps wouldn't have been active in the union otherwise into union activity, who maybe need a little bit more thought and support because they're brand spanking new to what a branch is, you know, sometimes, or how the branch structures work. So we have been mindful, and we're thinking about specific induction training for new activists, just to make sure they sort of are able to hit the ground running. So we do have the regional networks by the end of this year. Part of the objectives is that every single region will have an active regional network. Our devolved nations absolutely ahead of the game on this, and a couple of our northern Northwest and Yorkshire and Humberside particularly deserve mention, and probably because they remember very, very acutely what happened the last time there was a transition away from coal and it wasn't thought through carefully. So it's perhaps not a surprise that some of the areas that are well ahead on this game. But as I said, we have other regions already up and established. If you're a green rep, an environmental officer, then there's a list of contacts that we'll be able to give for each region to because we're beginning to establish them even where they're not already established. So by the end of the year we will have those. And then reform, yeah, I mean, particularly for us, there have been explicit moves to threaten the jobs of the sustainability officers in councils. The sustainability officers, the people whose job it is to come up with the transition plans in hospitals, in across all of our public services where reform are currently empowering those local authorities or intend to be and might well make gains. We have to be really mindful that we have members right now who feel directly under threat. We have members in health trusts who are discussing amongst their sustainability officers in other trusts while they're networking about whether they change the title of their job to make it less obvious that it's as green, that it, maybe call it something in, slightly different but the same, so they're not actually targeted arbitrarily to lose their job. But we also know, it's not all without hope, we also know that in some of the areas where reform have come in and said that they're going to be cutting whole departments and jobs, flooding in Lincolnshire of all the mad ideas to decide you don't need a committee to discuss flooding in Lincolnshire, one of the most flooded, flood damaged areas and at risk areas, is utterly ridiculous. We are also finding in some cases that financial sense, let alone any other kind of sense, is actually tempering what they do in practice versus how that sort of rah big noise of bluff and bluster threats that they bring to bear. So we do have to be extremely cautious. This is not going to get easier, and it's a divide and conquer. This has been picked up as one of the issues for the far right that has worked well over in America, and they're copying the playbook. What can we divide people on? Along simple lines. And as Mika said, it's an absolute false narrative, that the money is going to be invested, needs to be invested. Doing nothing costs more. So why talk about the cost, as long as it's, yes, there are always going to be some failed projects. When there are so many innovative projects, you're going to be able to find one that didn't work, was perhaps poorly planned. But generally speaking, innovation is happening, needs to happen. There will be disasters to pick up the pieces of that will need resources put into it. You'll need the officers and the expertise to be doing it. And it is our job to hold hands with other unions, to hold hands with other organisations, to press as hard as we can. And of course, there are elections coming up. And as Chris Packham said, using that vote will be increasingly important. So I hope we haven't gone too far over time.
I was going to say that there are certainly more questions, but we are at time there. Just that I know the next couple of questions I was gonna come to. Somebody asked about retired members, and there is a retired members highlight month later in the year. But certainly our retired members with their wealth of expertise and sometimes time can be really vital in this. And someone asked about international, and again, I mentioned this at the beginning, but certainly, I mean, I'm on our international committee, and we embed a lot of the work that we do on the green agenda within our international work that we already do, and sort of some specific stuff that we do around climate change with projects that we work with trade unions all across the world on. So just to highlight that, yes, we do them. Thank you to everyone for coming. I think we've had over 200 people on throughout the call today. And the key things I want everyone to do, if you're not already, is sign up to that UNISON newsletter, because you will get all of this information throughout the year. Talk to your next branch meeting to say, well, let's look at the resources, what can we do within our branch, and talk to your region to find out what they're doing and how you get involved in that. That I think is a good place for us all to start, and I'm absolutely confident that this year we're really going to transform the work that we do on this issue, bring it right to the centre as a mainstream trade union bargaining, organising, campaigning issue, and it'll be a great success. So thank you to Michelle, Thank you to Mika. Thank you to Chris Packham, who sadly isn't here live, but that video is excellent. And thank you to all of you for joining us. And I hope you have an excellent rest of your day. And I'm confident we'll have an excellent year of the green activity. Thank you.